Today I want to tell you about two truths about leadership. You make a difference, and you can't do it alone. Now, I could make leadership much more complex than that. If you took a moment on Google and put the word leadership in 0.25 seconds, you'd come up with 148 million hits. You can make leadership complex. Let me make it simple. You make a difference, and you can't do it alone. Now, let me tell you why I think that those are two important truths for us to remember so that we don't get lost. You make a difference. You might ask the question, who's the very first person that's got to follow you? Very first person that's got to follow you. Now, some of you are hoping I can tell you who that person is. You've been looking around for a while, wondering who is that person and when will they come into my life. But let me tell you, it's not a complex question. Ask the question, who's the first person that's got to follow you? And the simple answer is, it's got to be you. First person that's got to believe in you is you. The first person that's got to pay attention to you is you. The first voice of self-doubt that you have to deal with is the little voice inside of yourself that says, geez, if this is such a good idea, how come I thought of it? Right? I mean, how come somebody, and you fill in the blank, how come somebody with more education, more age, more experience, more salary, why hasn't somebody else already thought of this? But you see, if you can't believe in it yourself, then it's hard to imagine that you can get anybody else to believe in it. If you're not willing to follow yourself, hard to imagine that anybody else is going to be willing to follow you. So leadership begins with this belief in yourself. And it begins with an exploration of the inner territory. It begins with an understanding of who you are and what you're about and what you care about. Because answering those questions are important to you to try to figure out, given all the choices that you have in front of you, what am I going to do with myself? How am I going to use myself? What is it that I care about? What is it that I'd be willing to put my time and energy into? I'd be willing to suffer for, even sacrifice for. Truth of the matter is, you make a difference. And it's easier when you know who you are. It's easier to figure it out. Now, I had a business executive recently in my leadership class. I introduced him to the class as you would any senior executive. I want you to meet Spencer. He's got these degrees, this experience, this education, these accomplishments, and welcome him here today. And Spencer got up to the front of the class and he thanked me for that gracious introduction. But then he said to the students, he said, well, I appreciate Barry's introduction, but all Barry has told you is what I've done. He hasn't told you who I am. And if my insights on leadership are going to make any sense to you, then you need to know who I am. And I'll tell you this, he said, knowing who I am has been enormously helpful to me in figuring out what I would do and how I would go about doing it. And Spencer's comments were echoed by a student, a 25-year-old student in an MBA class that I had when I was at at Hong Kong University of Science and Technology. Olivia told me this. She said, at my personal best, when I was at my personal best as a leader, I realized that the first thing that I needed to do was I needed to figure out my values and my principles. And just this last year, I conducted a leadership seminar a national leadership seminar sponsored by Campfire. We had 100 high school students from around the country. I met one of those students telling me again about his personal best leadership experience. And Jason said, I said, when I was in high school, he said, I was a goof-off. He said, I joined this club because my older brother and his friends were members of this club. But then all of a sudden they graduated and they turned around and they made me the president. And he said, all of a sudden I needed to figure out for myself that I couldn't be a goof-off anymore. I needed to figure out within myself and for myself what I thought was important and why I thought it was important. And then he said I needed to make sure that my behavior was consistent with those values. Now, we can make this a lot more complex. Traditional thinking has it that somehow leadership happens at the top of organizations. Myth and legend somehow says that it's reserved for people who are charismatic, kissed by the gods, only a select few people. But when we've talked with people at the times that they've been at their personal best, for 30 years we've been asking thousands of people to tell us about that experience. And you know what? Everybody's got a story to tell. Everybody's got a story to tell. Now, you be the leadership scientist for a moment and just think about this. You spend 30 years around the world asking all kinds of people, tall people, short people, thick people, thin people, blue people, green people. You ask all kinds of people to tell you about a time that they've been as a leader, and they'll tell you about a time. Leadership is broadly distributed in the population. We'll never know when we hear the call to lead, to make a difference in our schools, our families, our homes, our communities, our unions, our congregations, if we don't know who we are, and if we don't know that what we do matters and what we say is important. But you know, if this were the only truth, it would lead to hubris and arrogance. You'd begin to think that leadership was all about you, and it was all about you, the leader. Even Martin Luther King put it this way. He said, "I have a dream." And he described that dream as his 4 children walking hand in hand safely down the street with your 4 children. And then he said, "I have a dream, but in order for this dream to happen, we will have to struggle together. We will have to fight together. We will have to go to jail together." See, the truth is you make a difference, but it's also true that you can't do it all by yourself. You can't do it alone. If you think about the definitions of leadership, in the academic literature there are hundreds of definitions of leadership. And I presume every one of you has your own definition. But if you took a moment to think about the essence of your definition of leadership, the kernel, the essence, what's it really come down to? See, if you answered this question, I know that someone is a leader because, fill in the blank. I know someone is a leader because, you ask the question because. What is it that they do? What happens? How do you know? Well, I'm sure you'd come up with lots of different answers to it, but let me tell you that I think the simplest answer to the question, I know someone is a leader, is because they have followers. Hard to imagine that you can be a leader without a follower. We've already said the first person that's got to follow you is you. But if you find yourself walking forward and you turn around and there's nobody there, then I suspect you're just out for a walk in the park. Leadership's a relationship. It's a relationship between those who would lead and those who would choose to follow. And why would people choose to follow you? Well, the paradox for us as leaders is that leaders turn their followers into leaders. See, if you're going to be a leader, you have to be a leader that makes it possible for other people to lead. Oftentimes, when we ask people to tell us about the times that they've been at their personal best as leaders, it wasn't unusual for them to tell us, well, here's what one young man, Charles, in Australia said. He said, "You asked me to tell you about my personal best?" He said, "I can't, because it wasn't me, it was us." Another financial analyst in Europe put it this way. She said to us, "No matter how capable a leader is, he or she won't be able to accomplish anything without the joint efforts that come from the team." Leadership's not a solo act. It's not a monologue, it's a dialogue, it's a conversation. And leaders develop relationships between themselves and their teammates, their colleagues, their constituents, and within. And they do that largely by having the interests of others ahead of their own interests. Maybe you remember the Academy Award-winning film called As Good as It Gets. It won an Academy Award for Jack Nicholson and an Academy Award for Helen Hunt, the 2 main actors in this movie. If you remember the film, I'm going to tell you about a scene about 3/4 of the way through the film. Jack Nicholson plays a character named Melvin who's a writer, but he's got some obsessive-compulsive disorder. He doesn't seem to like very many people, doesn't seem to have very much nice to say about anybody. Helen Hunt plays a woman named Carol, a waitress, and for a variety of reasons they get thrown together. And they're in a restaurant, and finally Carol turns to Melvin and says something like this. She says, "Look, you're about the most miserable person I've ever been with. You have nothing nice to say about anybody or anything, and I'm getting sick and tired of it. So I'll tell you what. I want you to give me a compliment. I'm going to make this really easy for you. You just give me a compliment. But if you can't, then I'm going to get up, I'm going to walk out this door, and I'm never going to talk to you again." So, Melvin takes this breath, and he turns to her and he says to her something like this. "You make me want to be a better person." And Carol says, "Gee, I think that's maybe the nicest compliment anyone has ever given me in my life. Now think about what Melvin was saying. In this relationship, I'm better off being in this relationship than I would be if I were all by myself. Being in this relationship makes me better off than I would be than if I were all by myself. Now put that into an organizational context, and isn't that what we want? We want to know that being with you, working with you, being in this organization will make me better than it would be if I were someplace else. I want to be in this organization and with you because you believe in me, you see greatness in me, you give me chances to do things that maybe I don't even think I'm ready to do. It's a relationship. And the relationship is central. If you think about it, how many of you are in relationships? And if you are in a relationship, how many of you would stay in a relationship in which you knew that the other person thought you were an idiot? Well, psychologically healthy people, making a great assumption here. There's a wonderful pop rock song called "According to You," and the singer says something like this: "According to you, I'm stupid, I'm useless, I can't do anything right. But according to him, I'm beautiful, I'm incredible, he can't get me out of his head." And then she says, "Why can't you see me through his eyes?" Well, that's what it's about. It's about wanting to be in a relationship in which people have our best interests at heart and they think that we're great. And those are the people we want to be with and we want to work with and we want to do great things with. In fact, I submit to you that we'll work harder and more effectively for people we like, and we like them in direct proportion to how they make us feel. And the research is quite clear about this. If you ask the question, why do some managers get ahead in an organization and some don't, it all has to do with the quality of the relationships with the people that they have in the organization. And you look at studies, HR studies that ask the question, why do people leave an organization? And the most typical response is people don't quit their companies, they quit their managers. They quit the relationship. Well, I told you I had 2 points I wanted you to try to remember. You make a difference, and you can't do it alone. Now, I think if you can put these on your dashboard, you'll never get lost. I make a difference, and I can't do it alone. Thank you.